The thing that I thought was so cool about when the Creep tapes was announced was that it was like we were getting 6 new mini Creep movies. And now we have all episodes, all 6 of them are out, and we have 8 Creep tapes and movies to rank, 2 movies, 6 Creep tapes, basically the episodes. And this is one of my favorite horror franchises that's kind of emerged in the last 10 years. It really is just cool, simple, creative, and also I think that this character of the Creep really has kind of elevated his way close to the top of my favorite horror characters and icons of all time. I think that in his own right, him, Peach Fuzz, just become one of my favorites. I think also Mark Duplass is just one of the great horror performances of our time. For me, right up there with Robert Englund as Freddy and Tobin Bell as Jigsaw. So let's get into the ranking. At number 8, I'm going to have to go with Brad. Tape 4, and not for any other reason. This one doesn't really pop as much as the other 2. I think that it kind of has a tough job of being in between 2 of what I think are the best episodes in the Creep tapes. So it gets a bit lost in the shuffle. And to be honest, even though it's at the bottom, I still think it's a really good episode. There are none of these tapes or movies that I dislike. And this is no exception. There are interesting ideas in this tape. The fact that pretty much from the get-go you have this true crime documentary guy who knows what the Creep is doing, who he is basically, doesn't have all the pieces, wants to figure it out, and that's kind of what the actual lore is. The lore this time is that he knows who he is. That's just a fascinating hook to me. Didn't entirely deliver on the premise, the idea. Not entirely. I think that they could have done a bit more with it. I think that there were a few times where I questioned why he stuck around and why he would basically risk getting caught as an accessory in this whole thing. But generally, I still enjoy it, but it just kind of has to go to the bottom for me. For number 7, Mike, Tape 1. I think that this is a really good reintroduction to the Creep, his web of lies, the world, this character and everything. It is just kind of a very stable reintroduction to that. Not much more, not anything less, just we're getting more of the same that we got from the movies, and I'm kind of okay with that for a first episode. But because of that, it feels a bit more derivative and kind of lowers it on the list a bit. Although I say that, it is just because it is a very much a similar setup, everything. There's not too much that distinguishes it from the first 2 movies. And Mike himself is an okay character. He's a little irritable and stuff. I just don't think that there's anything that makes Mike himself pop as a subject. So that kind of plays into it, but I think that there is a lot of gems in this episode. The Creep has a lot of funny moments. I love the part where they're reenacting Misery. He's pretending to be a vampire. I especially love that monologue he has at the end holding the axe. I think that that is actually one of Mark Duplass's best moments as this character. And that is always what I take away. That's what made me really get into rewatching that episode, was just that setup building to that part where he reveals who he is. It's excellent, but I just think because some of those derivative conventions, I will have to put it a little bit lower. So yeah, Mike at number 7. For number 6, Tape 2, Elliot. And I actually think that this one is a very, very solid one, and I almost feel kind of bad putting it this low. I just think it's because the other ones are so good that I feel like I have to put them higher. I really like this episode with Elliot the Bird Watcher. It's one of the funnier episodes. I'd say it's the second funniest Creep tape of this series. The whole lore of him pretending to be a failed paraglider or something, I think that's a very funny. The ruse is very much interesting to me. I'd say that it's probably the most different in terms of the ruses. As far as I feel like this one is the one that does something the most different, besides one episode I'm going to get to later. But this one doesn't have a cabin. It doesn't have that kind of similar imagery that we've come to expect from these Creep movies, the cabins in the woods, the snowy kind of upstate feeling that the first 2 movies have and the first Creep tape has. This completely does away with it. It's very much outside, kind of not centralized to any particular location besides these marshes. It's made it look very visually different, and I think that that might be some of why I kind of hold it back a little bit, because it does feel like it's a bit too different sometimes. But at the same time, I think that they did kind of change things up a bit with this episode, and to a certain degree, it does work for it. And you actually feel really bad for Elliot the Bird Watcher. That's probably some of the funnier aspects of it. This whole obsession and kind of how the Creep plays that obsession into his obsession. He almost parlays it. And like I said, more of just getting funny commentary from him. funny moments, a lot of them happen in this one, but some of that difference just holds it back a bit for me because it doesn't feel like it's what I love so much about this franchise. Now on to number 5, Mom and Albert. The thing about this episode is that it is definitely the most lore heavy of this whole Creep Tapes, and even including the movies, because in the movies I feel like you don't really know what he's lying about, what he's telling the truth about. He tells things about his backstory, but you kind of always have to take things with a grain of salt with him. But in this episode, you actually get his mother. You get to see how some of his family dynamics informed the killer that he'd eventually become. And that stuff is very interesting to me. It's kind of shocking that I have it this low, not really low on the list, it's in the middle of the pack. But the fact that this episode is in the middle of the pack just goes to show how much I really enjoy all these other movies and tapes. And also this was pretty much what I was really looking for in this show. I was looking to learn a little bit more, but not being shown too much. You get to actually see some more of his backstory. You get to see some of his history, but it still holds back a bit. There's still a lot you don't know. And even then, you're kind of put in this contextless situation where you're piecing things together. You're piecing together, like, how much does the mom know? How involved is this whole thing? Is, she a part of this? Does she kill too? And you also delve a bit more into his psyche, his kind of fragmented mind. And that's what I think is so cool about this. I wish it was longer. I think that this actually could have been a full movie. And I even think that if it was a full movie, this could have been the best Creep movie. But it just, because of the runtime, it's relegated to being a little bit surface level. And I think that might be what holds it back for me a bit. It puts it at number 5. Number 4, Brant. This is easily the most weird, different, and out there episode of the Creep Tapes. It's just so batshit and wild. Honestly, the first time I was watching it, I really didn't even know what was happening. I guess my understanding is that he's kind of created this tape, maybe hired someone else to play Peach Fuzz in that one scene where he's sitting across from them. It seems like he edited it to reflect his mental state and his fragmented psyche, which clearly he's just such a fucked up guy. I think he strung this whole thing together, but even then, I still have so many questions, even though I think I might have pieced together some semblance of an interpretation of what happened in this Creep Tape. Before that, I really do respect that it did go so different. It got incredibly weird and really went for it. They really could have alienated the audience with this. It definitely wasn't the more typical Creep Tape. Usually you have that basic setup. You have calling, set up $1,000 for someone to come. This pretty much throws all that out the window and just goes for something entirely different. And I'm glad that it did. I'm glad that this show allowed this franchise to evolve and do something different, do some experimental things that they wouldn't have been able to do if they settled down and confined themselves to just doing a whole nother movie. This is where the TV show aspect of the Creep Tapes really comes to benefit it. You couldn't have done something like this in a movie, and this medium of a show with different episodes allows for them to do different and interesting things like this. And that is why I really appreciate this episode. Also, just a brilliant showcase of Mark Duplass as the Creep once again. He's great in all these. He's always been the shining bright thing in this whole thing. This character I find just relentlessly watchable and entertaining. So when they put him in this scenario where he's basically by himself and he has to carry this whole thing on his shoulders by himself, I'm all in for it. I really dig it, and for that, I'm going to put it number 4. But in number 3, my favorite Creep Tape is actually Tape 3, Jeremy. This one, I think, is just the brilliant little packaged version of this character in this franchise. This is the one I had the most fun with. This is the one where I think that the Creep was easily the funniest. Like I mentioned, I'd say Elliot was probably the second funniest episode. So you have just this perfect showcase of this character in 25 minutes. I think this ruse is the funniest. I think the premise of Jeremy being this gotcha journalist trying to kind of pull one over on a priest, not knowing that he's dealing with one of the most psychotic people of all time, creates for a lot of great humor. There's a lot of great scenes where the Creep is just fucking with him. He's doing crazy shit, trying to just get a rise out of him, see what kind of interesting things he could push out of Jeremy. And that's what I really love. I love seeing him push people's buttons. That's kind of where the funniest aspects of this franchise come from. The real crux of what this series is just this weird guy who pushes people's buttons to the point of insanity and is also a serial killer. This episode showcases that, and I think it was also the first time we got a glimpse into some of that lore, the laptop, I think that was just very weird and interesting. And although they don't really give an explanation as to that, it kind of goes to show you that there's more than just him. So just in general, I think that on a technical level, episodes 5 and 6 are more rich, they're probably more interesting, but for this one I just thought it was the most fun to watch. It was the funniest to me, and I like the premise the best, so it's my favorite Creep Tapes, number 3. For number 2, it's kind of tough. I could really go either way on both of these original Creep movies, between Creep 1 and 2. It's kind of tough for me to decide because I think they're both just great companions to each other, and it makes it tough to pick. But for number 2, I guess I'll just pick Aaron, Creep 1. And this is with the, notation that depending on the day, it could change. I like the first one better sometimes I like the second one better. But I guess, gun to my head, I'm settling a list. My second favorite is Creep 1. What I really like about this movie is the way that it unravels the mystery, the reveals, kind of the wild ride you take with finding out this character is a liar, seeing the buttons that he pushes on this very normal guy of Aaron, and then that ultimate reveal of the end with the tapes, with him killing Aaron. It's a perfect showcase of a horror movie you ride along with, you let it take you for that ride, and then by the end you're like, holy shit, that was amazing. I put it in my top 10 favorite horror movies of all time for that reason, because I really enjoyed the trip that it kind of takes you on. As you peel back the layers, you find out a bit more of, this guy is weird. And then you question, is this guy dangerous? You find out more about him, but at the same time, there's still a lot of mystery surrounding him, and you don't exactly know what he's capable of towards the end. I think that ultimate reveal, one of my favorite horror movie endings of all time, I love that reveal. I think why I'd probably put it in second place is that Aaron just isn't as interesting of a character as Sarah. I think that's by design, that he's just a normal guy, and that, he's like an NPC and you screw with him and then he doesn't know how to react to these very weird things. But Mark Duplass's introduction to this character, this initial ruse that he uses, which will be the first of many. You find out that he's done it many times before and he will do it many times after. But it really is the way that the movie builds it up with this great character and then just lets out the Aaron the balloon in the most crazy way, in my opinion. I just love it. I love that movie, but I'm still putting it at number 2 because I think Creep 2 is a bit better. So for my first place pick of this franchise, of all 8 Creep tapes and movies, I'm gonna have to go with Creep 2, Sarah. I think what really differentiates and puts this movie a cut above the first one for me is that I think Sarah's a lot more of an interesting character than Aaron and really any of the rest of the subjects in this franchise. I think that some of it has to do with that it does what a sequel does, in that, they ramp up the dynamics. They put a completely different character from Aaron in the sequel. She pushes back against things. She kind of matches his freak, She acts just as weird as him to a certain degree and kind of plays along with all of his odd delusions. And I think that's really what works about this sequel, is that they find ways to actually push the Creep's buttons back in the same way that he was pushing Aaron's buttons in the first movie. You also get a lot of new material out of him, new reveals, and at the same time you still have that air of, is he telling the truth? I think that the way that he pushes buttons too in this movie just creates a different layer because he seems insane to her. She doesn't believe it, even though he outright tells her exactly who he is. But I think that that's some of the fun of it, is that it kind of reverses the tension. She knows who he is, she just doesn't believe him. And there's some comedic value to it. It adds comedic value to the things that he says, but it also inverts attention in just an interesting way that it kind of wasn't present in the first movie, because what they had to contend with is the fact that you already know who he is and what he does. In the first movie, you don't know what he is, you don't know what he does, and you don't know if he is dangerous or what he's capable of until the end. Since this movie starts out and you already know what he is capable of, they kind of find an interesting way to keep that tension despite you already having all the information about who he is. So the dramatic irony just kind of works differently. But like I said, you have an entirely different character dynamic with Sarah. I think that benefits the movie because, you can do something entirely different than what you did with Aaron. Beyond that, Mark Duplass's performance is, of course, I think the best in this movie of any of them. I love all these monologue speeches, these moments, these odd mannerisms, everything that he does to just bring this character to life and make him so damn believable. It's just what I eat up. It's what I've been, wanting since this movie came out, and what I was really missing because it wasn't looking like we were getting a third movie or any kind of continuation of this franchise until the Creep tapes happened. So with that, Creep 2 is my favorite of this franchise, of these tapes, of these movies. Although the first movie movie could squeak back in there potentially. I feel pretty confident in my answer. I just really love this franchise. I really hope that they keep going with the Creep tapes or, making more sequels, whatever they choose to do. I just want more of this character and I hope it keeps going. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I'd love to hear. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.